Ever since I've reviewed King Arthur the role-playing wargame, I have been clamoring for more entries based on Arthurian legend. While I have enjoyed what Nearcore Games was able to do with the license, I was curious what another studio may be able to bring to the table. Enter publisher Awakened Realms and the developer Questline, who were involved in another Arthurian legend title with Tainted Grail Conquest. That game was ultimately a mix of roguelike and RPG elements within a deck building system. Thanks to that game's positive receptions, today's game in Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, was given the green light. Compared to its predecessor, this game is a first-person RPG within the same vein as the Elder Scrolls series. It sounds pretty freaking awesome to me, but can this early access title at least show some potential? When you start the game, you can select new game as well as the difficulty, and after the cinematic explaining that King Arthur is dead and the world is in decay, you can create your character with only a handful of options so far, but thankfully the character customization regarding RPG elements is far more customizable, and for this build I'm going to go with an archer rogue hybrid who can use dual wield daggers when getting close in melee. I'll try to stick with being as light as possible, and this is my second playthrough. So on my first playthrough I actually did a tank build going full heavy armor and specializing in a shield with a mace. Sometimes I would switch to a two-handed weapon if I wanted a bit more power, but mainly stuck with a mace and shield combo. It was an overall a viable build, but I'm actually very curious what this one will bring. And I'm honestly gonna try not to make too many Elder Scrolls comparisons throughout this review because there's way too many similarities, but I really just can't help it with this one. So you wake up as a prisoner and are getting interrogated by the guard, and he basically asks you who you are and what the hell you were doing to end up in this place. And this will end up determining the initial stats and specialities that you have. So quickly after that, you are eventually rescued and must try to break yourself out of prison and go through the path that's laid out to you. It's ultimately, this serves as the game's tutorial system, and it's an overall solid way of going about it. All the basics here are covered, including combat, sneaking, and some other powers that you'll get into later on. And eventually you will break out and wind up on another island, and that's when the game opens up a lot more. But honestly, that's all I really want to say regarding the story, as any additional information I mention will basically be a spoiler. I will say though that I'm very intrigued on what ultimately transpires here. There are a lot of seeds that are being planted that I assume will be harvested in future chapters. The game ends at chapter 1, so that's all you really get so far. There's also a really cool twist at the end of chapter 1, like when you complete the main quest line, and I actually found that to be very interesting, so I definitely want to keep playing after that. But like I said, it's only up to chapter 1, and I'll get more into the game's content later in this review. So once you do get off the tutorial prison, like I mentioned, the game does open up tremendously, and you can basically go almost anywhere that you want to off rip. Although I do recommend that you follow the main quest just to get your bearings and level up a little bit. Again, I didn't want to do this, but again, got to compare it to Elder Scrolls again, because just that level of freedom, that parallel is just right there. So you can just honestly focus on side quests and ignore the main quest if you want to, and still have a ton of fun just exploring and seeing the various monsters and interesting loot that you can come across. And I also recommend to just wander off a little bit after you get to a certain part in the main quest, just to, you know, take out some bandits or just take out some monsters just to get some loot. And it's honestly a lot of fun. Really reminds me of Elder Scrolls, and like I said, don't always want to make that comparison because I do believe this game does stand on its own, but again, it's hard not to make those comparisons. And for the combat itself, it's actually pretty damn good. I mean, first-person melee combat is always an iffy thing to pull off, but I think they've honestly done a great job here. And you can definitely feel the weight of every hit, especially when you have like a heavier weapon and when you make contact with the enemy. So as a lighter character, I basically built my character to swing as fast as possible and hit as quickly as possible once engaged into melee. And the primary is to really just, from this character, is just to kill in stealth, either with a quick stab or even with an arrow with some distance attached. And honestly, it all feels very good to use. I also like the parry mechanic, as if you time your block with an enemy strike, you can easily open them up to drain their stamina. It's a lot of fun, but I will say with the parrying is that if you do it too much, the AI does try to adapt and will try to delay the swings, which makes it a lot harder to parry, and you have to change up your strategy a little bit. I think a lot of why the combat works so well is just due to the nice variety of weapons here, and you honestly have quite a wide range to choose from of melee weapons, ranging from very light daggers to some very heavy warhammers, and all are important to monitor as heavier weapons will often stagger opponents and do more damage at the higher cost of stamina consumption. And yet it is very important to pay attention to your stamina or you'll drain it hella quick. That was an issue that I had for my first character. She was a tank, but again, just because all the heavy armor she was wearing and the heavy weapons that I was using, she couldn't really swing that much. Thankfully, only 1 to 2 swings was all she needed to do, but it was one thing I had to keep note of. And the same applies also with ranged weapons as well. So you have your short bows, which are light and quick to shoot. Long bows will take a bit longer to draw, and then great bows will do the most damage, but those take a long time to pull back. So the weight of your armor also plays a factor in stamina drain and other factors within. And since I'm going for a light build, I get a small boost in overall stamina. If you went with a heavier build like my first character, you'll get a bit of damage reduction, overall damage reduction to you, and your strikes hit harder and have a higher chance to stagger. And as you kill things and complete quests, you'll eventually gain enough experience to level up, and this allows you to increase a single attribute point by 1 point, while every 2 levels will grant an ability point. And abilities are basically passive perks, which work very well here. Almost all build types are covered by these abilities. So whether you want to be a tank, a DPS machine, an archer, a thief, a mage, or whatever else you come up with, whatever hybrid you have, it's honestly, again, not to sound like a broken record, but this is a pretty competent system here, and I had a lot of fun. I had a couple of abilities that lowered the stamina when I swung, stuff that increased my attack speed with swinging, with dual wielding daggers, and stuff that just overall gave me benefits for wielding the 2 daggers, and also lowering the time it takes for me to draw back my bow. So overall, a lot of things to play with here and a pretty competent system. And thankfully, there is more than just combat to keep you busy if you want to explore something else. So outside of dialogue and persuading people based on your stats, you can also participate in cooking, blacksmithing, and even a little bit of alchemy. And finding recipes will basically be the key to your survival, especially for those health potions, which there aren't that many that you can find. You'll probably rely on food. Similar to Elder Scrolls. Sorry, how to do that again. As to what you should expect, it's basically getting all the right ingredients and giving it a shot to create the item in question. There's quite a decent variety here to what you can create. You can make some like a heavy armor set, like a heavy knight armor set, and even some salves, as well as creating fire and lightning arrows to use against your enemies. So that was really cool. What I liked as an archer, I really enjoyed making fire arrows in particularly, and seeing my enemies catch on fire after getting hit by so many of them. And there's also an upgrade system for your weapons and armor, which will be very expensive at first, but ends up being worth it in the long run. You can also add relic slots and then eventually find relics within the world and add these relics to your weapons. So that's honestly a pretty fun feature, and I like what they have here so far. All I would like is a bit more in terms of recipes that you can find, especially for weapons and armor, but I assume that'll probably come in due time. So as for the game's content that I alluded to, the devs estimate that it'll take you about 10 to 15 hours to get through all the main and side quests. And for my first playthrough, I got about 12 hours, but I ended up getting a much shorter playtime during my second playthrough. And personally, I do love the build diversity here and running various builds, but I'm not sure if the amount of content, and by that I mean like quest content and just the overall quests and things you can do, justify the price tag. The game is currently being sold at $30 normally, but thankfully it can be purchased for sale around $24, which is when I bought the game. I bought it at sale price, and I feel like there's an acceptable amount of content for that price. but again, your mileage may vary depending on your gaming budget, and that's just something to take a note here. And for an early access title, there are going to be your share of bugs. Thankfully, I've had 0 crashes, but I did have a few notable issues that I should mention. Sometimes monsters would just spawn within the scenery, causing them to be stuck and not be able to move out of it. Like they'll be stuck in a rock, a mountain, etc. There's also a severe memory leak that happens if you play for too long, and this just kills performance outright and will need to be fixed by quitting the game outright. Performance and optimization in general is just below average even without that issue, although I am expecting that to get better within due time. I'm also sad to report that there is no roadmap currently, which is a bit of unfortunate news. The devs have promised that there would be one after their next update, but only time can tell when that'll happen. As for the presentation portion, this is subject to change for these kinds of titles. The graphics are honestly pretty good for an indie title and look pretty good in several instances. Some of the animations can be cleaned up, but nothing here looks terrible. I do like the environments, especially staring out into the mountains. I think they just look gorgeous. So the draw distance is very good. The music is pretty awesome, and I honestly really like this tribal Britannic theme that they got going with it. The voice acting, however, could use some improvement. Some of the voices are very well done, while others need to be done over or at least improved from an audio perspective. Some are just way too quiet, while others sound way too loud. Overall, this is a very solid foundation that can become an all-time classic with the right pieces in place. I absolutely love the build diversity, the leveling up system is well done, and the story has me interested to see what happens next and how my choices will ultimately impact the narrative. The only 2 issues that I have right now is with the glitches and optimization, as well as the somewhat lack of content relative to the price. And I get it, I understand that it is a highly ambitious game and early access is more of a long run thing, but some gamers might not have the budget to invest in an early access title, so it's still something that I have to note. Either way though, I still enjoyed my time immensely, but I will be waiting for more content before diving back in. I may actually go with a third playthrough with a pure mage build next time, just to see how that ends up turning out for me. And I mean, I barely even talked about magic in this one, so that's a whole system within itself. But either way, I'll be watching this one closely as we have a potential sleeper hit on our hands. Thank you guys for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse signing off.